think I'd always had a desire to spend time outdoors. So when a buddy of mine asked if I wanted to go on a weekend camping trip, I said yes right away. He mentioned he knew a great location in northern Georgia at a place called Franklin Hollow State Park. He said it was one of the top spots for camping, filled with trails, wildlife, and peaceful scenery. We arrived late Friday afternoon and set up our tent at a site beside a quiet lake. The park was massive, covering close to 1,500 acres. There were a few other people camping, but not so many that it felt crowded. We had enough space and seclusion to feel like we were in the middle of nowhere. The campsite was in good shape with access to clean water, restrooms, and fire pits. We unpacked our things, built a fire, and grilled hot dogs and roasted marshmallows. It was a perfect night. We sat around the fire for hours, joking and laughing while the stars slowly filled the sky. The following morning, we decided to explore more of the area and do some hiking. We brought along some water, snacks, and a park map, and made our way to the closest trailhead. The park offered around 13 miles of trails, ranging from easy walks to more moderate climbs. We picked a loop path that followed the lake and promised some good views. The trail was marked clearly, easy to follow, and we enjoyed the fresh breeze and all the natural sounds around us. Along the way, we spotted some birds, a couple of squirrels, and a few deer, but nothing too wild. We stopped for lunch at a picnic spot that looked over the lake. The water was calm and see-through, reflecting the sky and the thick green trees all around it. It was peaceful and quiet, and we took some photos to remember the moment. We kept walking and eventually reached the far end of the lake. The trail got more forested and quiet, and we didn't run into anyone else from that point on. It really felt like we had the place all to ourselves, which we liked. We goofed around, sang random songs, and enjoyed the walk. We hadn't realized how late it was getting until we noticed the sun dropping behind the trees. We checked the map again and figured we still had a couple of miles to cover before we'd be back at the campsite. We picked up the pace, hoping we'd make it back before dark. But just as we were nearing the end, we heard something loud in the underbrush beside the trail. It sounded like a large animal moving fast through the branches and leaves. We stopped in our tracks, listening hard. Maybe it was a deer or even a bear. We had heard there were black bears in this area, but they usually stayed away from people. We couldn't see anything, but then the sound came again, closer this time. It was moving toward us, and it was moving fast. We panicked. Without thinking, we took off running. We followed the trail as fast as we could, hoping to either reach our campsite or at least find another person. Whatever it was chasing us, and we could feel it getting closer. We didn't stop to look back. We could almost feel its breath behind us, hear the growl in its throat. We yelled for help, but there was no one around. We were alone, and something was hunting us. We kept running until we couldn't anymore. We stumbled, fell, and rolled down a slope beside the path. We landed hard, scratched up and bleeding in places. When we looked up, we finally saw it. It wasn't a normal animal. It looked like a wolf, but it was way too big. Bigger than any bear I'd seen, with dark fur and burning red eyes. Its teeth were long and sharp, and its claws looked like blades. Its face was twisted and scarred, like it had survived fights with worse creatures. It was terrifying, something out of a bad dream. Stared us down and we just froze. We knew we were going to die. It leapt toward us, and we braced for the worst. I shut my eyes, expecting pain, waiting to feel it tear into us. But then came a loud bang. We opened our eyes and saw the creature lying still on the ground, not moving. There was a hole in its skull, and blood poured into the dirt. A man was standing over it, holding a rifle. He wore a forest ranger's uniform, with a patch on his shoulder and a badge on his chest. He looked at us and nodded calmly. "You two all right?" he asked. "You're lucky I was patrolling this trail. That thing's been attacking campers for nearly a month. It's been hard to catch, too quick and too smart. But I finally got it." We couldn't believe we were still alive. We thanked him again and again, and he helped us to our feet. He walked us to his truck and checked over our injuries. Luckily, we only had some bruises and cuts. He said he'd file a full report and advised us to pack up our stuff and leave the park before dark. We didn't argue. We packed everything and left that evening. We didn't talk much on the ride home, and we never went camping again. For as long as I could remember, there had been talk in our town about an old shack deep in the forest near the edge of Brenton, where I grew up. Some folks claimed it was just something made up to scare kids, but others swore they had seen it from a distance, hidden behind thick trees and tangled brush. It wasn't on any of the local maps, and no one ever seemed to know who it belonged to. I had always been curious about it, but there was something in the stories that kept me from going to look for myself. That changed just over a week ago when I came across it completely by accident. I was walking home after class, taking a shortcut through the woods like I'd done a few times before. The smell of stagnant water and wet ground hung in the air, and barely any sunlight managed to slip through the leaves overhead. That's when I saw it. A glimpse through the trees, but it was enough to make me freeze on the spot. It was real. The shack looked like it had been there for over 100 years. The wooden siding was faded and splintered, the roof sagged unevenly, and the windows had boards nailed over them, most of which were broken or rotting. My heart was racing with a strange mix of dread and curiosity. I knew right away I was going back to see it up close. The next morning, I talked two of my friends, Darren and Felix, into coming with me. We met early and brought flashlights and a couple of backpacks, though none of us had a clear idea what to pack for something like this. The forest seemed quieter than usual. No birds, no bugs, just the crunch of our shoes on the dead leaves and the occasional sound of something small moving through the underbrush. When we got to the place, it looked even more run down in daylight. It had the feel of something forgotten and left behind, like it didn't belong in this time. We stood there for a long minute, just staring. The silence felt heavy. After a bit, I stepped forward, took a breath, and pushed open the door. It groaned loudly, like it hadn't been moved in decades. Inside, it smelled old and damp, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes. Rays of sunlight came in through the holes in the wooden walls, lighting up tiny particles of dust floating in the air. The furniture was sparse, just a few pieces covered in cobwebs and grime. The floor had a thick layer of dirt like no one had stepped inside in years. It felt like entering a place frozen in time, but one that had been quietly falling apart all along. We decided to split up and check out different parts of the shack. I was drawn to a smaller room in the back. It was mostly empty except for a wooden chair facing a narrow window. Something about it felt off, like whoever had sat there had done so for hours, just staring into the trees. Next to the chair was a small metal box. It was rusted and cold to the touch. I picked it up and felt a chill run down my spine. I popped it open. Inside were a bunch of old photos, yellowed and worn. They showed people, men, women, even kids, standing in front of the shack. Their expressions were flat, almost grim. Not one person was smiling. I didn't know who any of them were. Then I noticed something strange. In every single photo, way in the back, behind the shack, there was a shadowy figure. Always in the same spot. Blurry, hard to make out, but there, almost blending in with the trees. It gave me a bad feeling in my gut. I got scared, and I called over the others to show them what I had found. They looked through the photos, and I could see the color drain from their faces. No one said anything, but we were all thinking the same thing. That place wasn't just empty. It had been left behind on purpose. We didn't stick around. We walked fast back through the woods, not talking, just wanting to get as far from that shack as possible. The air felt heavy the whole way back, like something was following behind us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the photos, about that figure. It made my skin crawl. Something about the whole thing felt wrong, like we had stirred up something that had been resting for a long time. The next morning, I went back to the woods by myself. I don't really know why. I just felt like I had to put those photos back where I found them. But when I got there, I stopped dead. The shack was gone. The spot where it had stood was now just trees and bushes, nothing out of place. No sign that anything had ever been there. No footprints, no boards, just thick undergrowth like it had always been that way. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. Neither did Darren or Felix. We all went back to our regular lives, pretending it had never happened. But I know we all still think about it, I know I do. Sometimes, when I'm by myself, I remember that shack. I wonder what it was. And more than that, I wonder where it went. Late at night, when I'm lying awake, I hear little noises. Creaks in the floor, the rustle of leaves outside, or the sound of something brushing the window. Feels like the shack isn't really gone. Like it's still out there somewhere. Watching, waiting, and I still have the photos. I wrapped them up and buried them deep in the back of my closet. But every so often, I swear I hear something shift inside that rusted tin box. Like something's trapped in there, and it wants out. Whatever it is, I know one thing. I'm never going back to those woods. Some things are better left alone. I went out for a run one evening, thinking it might help me unwind after a long, tiring day. The streets were just as still as I had expected. Most people were probably already inside for the night, winding down. I appreciated the calm, the way the road stretched far ahead with no other souls in sight. It felt like I was the last person left in the neighborhood. As I picked up pace, the rhythm of my footsteps on the asphalt was oddly soothing. The air had a bite to it, a little colder than I'd expected, and the street lamps threw long, faint shadows across the sidewalk. I passed by a line of small businesses, all shut for the night, their windows dark and still. The only sounds I could hear were the light rustling of dry leaves and my own breath. I stayed on my regular route, turning onto a slimmer road that branched away from the main neighborhood. The lights here were weaker, and the homes farther apart. Thick trees lined the roadside, their limbs drooping low and reaching out like crooked arms. As I moved forward, everything grew quieter. Even the insects seemed to go silent. The road curved ahead into a spot that always made me a little anxious. I told myself it was nothing, but something about that stretch always felt off. Maybe it was the way the trees crowded in close or how the street lights left big pockets of darkness in between. I tried to keep my stride steady, focusing on my breathing to avoid getting stuck in my head. But as I reached the curve, an odd feeling crept over me, as if eyes were following me. I turned my head quickly, scanning around. Nothing, just the same road and the same trees swaying with the breeze. I shook it off, blaming my imagination, and kept going. Still, the feeling clung to me. It got stronger with each step. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Maybe someone was out there. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, like a presence keeping pace just outside my vision. My heartbeat picked up speed, not from the exercise, but from a growing sense of dread. I kept telling myself it was just nerves, that I was alone. But my body didn't believe me. Without making a decision, I suddenly found myself sprinting. I didn't check behind me. I didn't want to. My lungs pulled in sharp, shallow breaths, and the road ahead felt endless. Every shape in the dark looked like it was closing in. Every sound felt like it was right behind me. Then, finally, I saw the familiar lights of my own street in the distance. I pushed myself harder, just needing to get home. When I reached the edge of my block, I forced myself to stop and breathe. My chest was heaving, and sweat rolled down my face, but the panic was already starting to fade. I began walking the last short distance to my doorstep, even chuckling a little. I had let my thoughts get the better of me, scared myself over nothing. Just an empty street and some trees. That was all. I shook my head, a little embarrassed, but when I reached my front door and grabbed for my keys, something made me freeze. I looked down. My brand new running shoes were covered in thick, wet dirt. The strange part was, the road I'd just run on was completely paved and dry. No mud anywhere. I stared at the soles, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I'd unknowingly stepped into something earlier, but I would have noticed. My fingers started to shake as the realization hit me. Something wasn't right. I didn't want to think about it anymore. I got the door unlocked fast and stepped inside, locking it tight behind me. I told myself it was just a dusty patch I hadn't seen. But deep inside, I knew that was a lie. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness I couldn't shake. The night before kept playing in my head, and I made up my mind to pick a different jogging route from then on. As I got ready to leave the house, I looked at the running shoes sitting near the door. I cleaned them before bed. Now they looked totally dry and spotless. But then I noticed something that sent a chill right through me. On the bottom of the right shoe was a faint but clear handprint. Small, like it came from a child, pressed deep into the rubber. It hadn't been there when I wiped them clean the night before. I stared at the print, feeling the cold rise inside me. I didn't know where it came from or what it meant, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't be running down that road again. Once again, it was early evening, just after the sun had dipped below the horizon, when I chose to take a walk through the woods just outside my neighborhood. I was familiar with the path, having wandered it countless times before. The crisp breeze felt refreshing on my skin, and the dried leaves gave a gentle crunch under my shoes. I never really felt uneasy in the forest. I actually enjoyed how calm and quiet it always felt out there. But as I moved deeper into the trees, something began to shift. The tall birch and maple trees started to crowd in closer, their trunks and branches blocking what little light was left. Before long, I was standing in near-complete blackness. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, but the dim glow hardly pierced the dense gloom that surrounded me. I considered heading back, but for some reason I couldn't quite explain. I kept going. The trail beneath my feet started to feel slightly unfamiliar, like something wasn't quite right. I realized the usual forest sounds, the distant bird calls, the breeze nudging the treetops, the insects, had gone completely still. The silence was thick, so much so that each footstep I took seemed unnaturally loud. I kept walking, repeating to myself that it was only my imagination. Then up ahead, I noticed something, a small lump resting directly in the middle of the path. I froze, my eyes strained to make it out. At first, I figured it might be an animal, maybe a raccoon or stray dog, but it didn't move. It just sat there motionless, like it had been placed there on purpose. My chest tightened and I felt the air around me get heavy, like something unseen was pushing down on me. I didn't want to get closer, but I also couldn't leave without knowing what it was. After what felt like a long time standing there, I forced myself to take a step forward, heart thudding loudly in my chest. As I drew closer, I saw it wasn't any kind of animal at all. It was a small mound made of sticks and leaves, arranged in a way that didn't look natural. Someone had clearly taken time to place everything just so. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Relief swept over me, just a weird stack of debris, harmless. But then I noticed more of them. Scattered along the sides of the path, maybe a dozen or more, each one arranged the same odd way. The relief I felt vanished, replaced by a crawling unease. It almost felt like they were set up to guide someone or something deeper into the woods, like some strange trail left behind. That was enough. I decided to turn around and head back the way I came. But when I spun around, the trail behind me didn't look the same anymore. The trees felt closer together, the path narrower. My phone's light began to flicker. I muttered under my breath, trying not to panic. I picked up my pace, hoping to find something familiar, but nothing around me looked like it had earlier. My heart was beating fast as I pushed forward, trying not to break into a full run. After a few long minutes, I spotted a thin gap between the trees up ahead, a break in the darkness. I made for it without thinking, practically stumbling toward it. As I stepped into the open, I found myself back on a paved road, the same one that led back toward my neighborhood. I paused for a moment and glanced back toward the forest's edge. The tree line stood still, quiet, like it was watching me. Whatever was out there had let me go. The strange piles were gone, hidden again in the darkness. I didn't look back again as I walked home, my footsteps echoing down the sidewalk. My thoughts were a mess, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It didn't feel like a dream, but it also didn't feel like something that belonged in the real world. When I finally stepped inside, I locked the door and dropped onto the couch, trying to shake the weird tension still clinging to me. I was safe now, inside my own home, but I couldn't stop thinking about those piles in the woods. As I sat there, the memory started to dull slightly, like it was slipping away, but the unease stuck around. I couldn't explain what I saw. Part of me didn't even want to. Maybe some things are better left unknown. Just as I started to calm down, I heard it, a soft rustle outside my window. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I turned to look, but there was nothing out there, just shadows and the outline of trees in the distance. I told myself it was just the wind, but deep inside, I knew something was still out there, beyond the trees, still watching, still waiting. That night, I barely slept. The next day, I avoided the woods. I didn't mention it to anyone. I tried to pretend it never happened. But every so often, I still hear that same soft rustling noise, like something moving just out of view, like it's waiting for me to come back. And I have a feeling that one day, I might. It was meant to be just another hike. I needed to clear my mind and take a break from city life. I chose a trail that didn't get too much foot traffic because I wanted quiet. The sky was overcast, but I wasn't worried. The forecast said it wouldn't rain, just clouds all day. The trail was easy at first. It curved through a dense patch of woods filled with tall trees. The air was crisp, and the smell of damp soil and fallen leaves filled my nose. I got into a steady pace, soaking in the stillness, with only the sound of my boots hitting the dirt and the soft flutter of birds flying off now and then. After about an hour, the path grew steeper. It was a bit rougher, but I welcomed the challenge, pushing myself harder as the elevation increased. The trees started to thin, giving way to scattered rocks and open space. A breeze picked up, and I felt a shiver run through me. I stopped for a bit, caught my breath, and sipped some water. That's when I realized how silent it had become. It wasn't the same calm quiet I'd felt earlier in the woods. This was different. It felt heavy, like the whole mountain had gone still, holding its breath. I shrugged it off, blaming it on the altitude, and moved forward. The path narrowed as I went higher, and the ground beneath me turned loose and uneven. I had to step carefully. One wrong move and I could have tumbled off the side. The clouds overhead thickened, and though it wasn't late, everything began to dim like the day was ending too early. A tight feeling built in my stomach, but I tried to ignore it, keeping my eyes on the trail. After around 30 minutes, I reached a ridge. The view was breathtaking. A huge stretch of woods below, and misty hills in the distance. Still, something didn't feel right. I looked around and noticed a narrow, barely there trail leading farther up the mountain. It wasn't marked on any maps, and it didn't look like anyone had been on it for a long time. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and I followed it. The way up was rough, more like a fated animal path than a hiking route. In some places, I had to use my hands to climb over rocks. The wind was much stronger here, cutting through my clothes and stinging my skin. I kept going, though something deep inside told me to turn around. After what felt like hours, I spotted something ahead, a small, weather-beaten shack. It looked ancient, made of dark wood that almost disappeared into the landscape. I hadn't expected to find anything like that so far from the marked trails. It looked like it had been left to rot for years. The windows were shattered, and the door hung loosely off the frame. I moved closer, and an uneasy feeling crawled over me. The place felt out of place, like it shouldn't exist there, or maybe I shouldn't be there, but I couldn't walk away without looking inside. I slowly pushed open the door. It let out a long, drawn-out creak. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with the smell of decay and dust. The floorboards moaned under each step. Old furniture sat motionless under thick layers of grime and spiderwebs. A cold, unused fireplace was stuffed with ash. I took a few more steps in, heart thumping. Then I saw it. In the corner, half buried under broken wood and dirt, was a pile of bones. They were discolored with age but not ancient. And they were human, I was sure of it. A chill shot through me. I slowly backed out, my mind racing. Who had died there? How long had they been there? Why had I stumbled across it? I turned and ran. My breathing turned ragged, and I didn't care how loud I was. I just needed to get away. I slipped more than once on the rocky path, barely catching myself. All I wanted was to be far from that place. When I finally reached the main trail again, I didn't stop. I kept running all the way to where my car was parked. I jumped in, started it, and drove off, not once glancing behind me. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd awakened something on that mountain, like whatever was tied to that shack didn't want to be found. I tried to forget, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those bones, and I heard that awful quiet again. Not peaceful quiet, but something else entirely. Months later, I got a call from the local authorities. They'd hiked out to the cabin after I filed a report and found the remains. But they couldn't tell who they belonged to or what had happened. No ID, no clues. They marked it as unsolved. But what they told me next still haunts me. When they returned a week later for further investigation, the place was empty. The bones were gone. The debris had been cleaned up. It looked like no one had ever been there. I haven't been hiking since. That cabin still comes to mind now and then. I wonder what really went on there. But deep down, I think I already know. Some things don't want to be discovered, and they'll do whatever it takes to stay hidden. I'd been behind the wheel for hours, and the thick woods around me were swallowing the last light of day. The old cabin way out here was meant to be a quiet escape. I'd found it on a rental site, cheap and far from the city noise. I figured I needed some stillness, or maybe I just talked myself into thinking I did. The place looked exactly how I pictured it. Wooden siding, a porch that groaned when I stepped on it, and a kind of silence that settled heavy in the air. Inside, the scent of aged timber and moisture hit me right away. It was basic, just a bed, a little kitchen, and a fireplace that probably hadn't seen flames in a long time. Still, it was enough for a short break from everything. The first night passed without much happening. I unpacked, got a small fire going, and tried to dive into a book. Every so often, I heard faint sounds. A board creaking under weight, maybe something brushing past the side of the cabin. I kept telling myself that was just how old cabins sounded in the woods. But even then, I couldn't shake this odd sense that something wasn't quite right. The second night, I was woken up by a sound outside, close, really close. Not an animal. It was footsteps, slow, careful. My heart started hammering as I sat up in bed and held my breath, trying to make out where it was coming from. The steps drew closer, each one measured, unhurried, until they stopped just beyond the front door. I didn't move. I just stayed there, barely breathing, waiting. Felt like forever. Nothing happened. No knock, no door opening, nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself I was just spooking myself. It's easy to do when you're alone in the dark. I forced myself to lie back down and tried to sleep, but my body wouldn't relax for a long time. When the sun came up, I stepped outside, trying to tell myself it had all been in my head. That's when I noticed them, marks in the dirt. Shoe prints. Human. My stomach turned. Somebody had been out here in the night, standing no more than a few steps from where I'd been sleeping. Panicked, I grabbed my stuff and tossed it into the car as fast as I could. I didn't care about the refund or what I'd spent. I just wanted out. As I slammed the trunk shut, something else caught my attention. The tracks, they didn't go anywhere. They didn't head off into the trees. They just ended right there, in the middle of the clearing, like whoever had been standing there had vanished. My skin went cold. I jumped into the car and sped off, not once looking back. The road wound tightly through thick forest, trees leaning over the narrow path like they were trying to hold me in. My pulse didn't slow, and even though the cabin was fading far behind me, I still felt eyes on me. By the time I reached the main road, I finally started to feel like I could breathe again. The cabin, the weird silence, the tracks. It was all behind me now. I told myself I'd never stay somewhere like that again. Once I got back into the city, everything seemed normal again. Streets were busy, people all around, noise bouncing off buildings. I felt silly for how much it had messed with me. Maybe it had been a prank. Some local trying to freak out out-of-towners. Or maybe it really was nothing. Still, even as life returned to normal, my mind kept going back to those footprints. The way they just stopped, like the person or thing who made them hadn't walked away. A few weeks later, the rental site sent me an email asking how my visit was. I stared at it a long time. All those feelings came rushing back. How unsettled I'd been, how scared I'd felt. But in the end, I just erased the message. Some stuff's better not to dig back up. I tried to move on, and I was glad to be back in the city where the only sounds of footsteps were from actual people. Not something waiting outside a door. But every so often, when the house is quiet and it's late, I still hear them. Not outside anymore. Inside my mind. Steady. Close. Like whoever was out there that night never really left. Like maybe, just maybe, they're getting closer.